Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are in front of your computer. This is Emiko Atherton with the National Complete Streets Coalition, and I am so excited today to be opening up our July webinar series in collaboration with our National Steering Committee members, NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, as well as Philadelphia Water and the City of Denver. We're going to be talking today about greening the streetscape, complete streets and stormwater management. For those of you who aren't aware, NACTO just released a fabulous guideline on urban stormwater management that I encourage everybody to look at, and we'll make sure to send out further information about that. But I wanted to talk at the beginning. We first need to go to a slide of myself. Hello again, for those of you who don't know me, about why we're talking about urban flooding in the context of completes and why it's so important. I think, and this is new information to a lot of people, but nationally floods cause $7.82 billion in damages per year, but much of this flooding is not caused by rivers and lakes overflowing. It's caused by our stormwater and sewage systems being overhauled by heavy rainfall. The Center for Neighborhood Technology did a survey of towns and cities in 8 states in the Great Lakes region, and they found that flooding complaints like street, parking lot, and backyard flooding and sewer backs into buildings were more than twice as common as overbank floodings from bodies of water. What's even more alarming is that this problem is expected to worsen. For those of you that follow transportation, our national transportation funding, and the state of our national infrastructure, we know our infrastructure is aging. It's failing us, and rainfall is increasing as a result of climate change. And so what this means is without innovative strategies to manage stormwater, we'll see an increased damage from flooding into urban areas. And this isn't just damage to property and to our infrastructure. This is damages to life. A little unknown fact about me is that in a previous job, I worked for a member of the King County Council who also chaired the King County flood control district, and a lot of what we worked on were urban flooding issues. And sadly, during that time, there was actually a woman in the city of Seattle who died due to flooding in her home that was a result of poor stormwater management within the city. And that was outside of the floodplain. We have another survey from CNT, which happened in Midlothian, Illinois, that found, again, most of flood impacts happen outside the floodplain, where insurance coverage for flooding is not as comprehensive. For instance, you don't think of the city of Seattle as a floodplain. Our floodplains are north and south of the city, and yet we did have a lot of flooding. So who bears the weight of this burden? You know, those who cannot afford to move. Often cities also bear the burden as they are responsible for cleaning up the stormwater. We've had CSO, or combined sewage overflow issues. So how does this come into play with complete streets? Well, while we're going out and retrofitting, I say it actually comes from 2 angles. As we're going out and we're retrofitting and redesigning our streets, there is the opportunity to really do stormwater improvement projects at the same time. So it's a way to really take advantage of that. On the other level, we have stormwater projects that are happening, combined sewer overflow projects that are happening with cities, often as a result of a consent decree with the federal government. And there are opportunities to improve the street network as you're making stormwater improvements. So really they go hand in hand. I always think about, in the work that we do in Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition, we're trying to hit multiple bottom lines. There's often the economic bottom line, there's the people bottom line, there's the equity bottom line, and there's also the environmental bottom line. And when you think about, again, the combination of stormwater management and transportation, retrofits, and redesign, you really hit that nexus where you're hitting all those bottom lines. You're improving the street network to better facilitate economic opportunity. You're often doing stormwater management in neighborhoods that have had the poorest infrastructure and have areas of flooding, so you're hitting the equity bottom line, hitting the environmental bottom line by better managing our water and our resources and the people, because the damage to our property and then to our lives is so important. So I think it's such a great nexus in hitting all those bottom lines we really look for at the coalition. So with that said, I want to start out by introducing Erin Villery. Erin is a program association with NACTO, that's the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and a National Complete Streets Steering Committee member. He is an associate with their Designing Cities initiative. He works with cities to expand peer learning opportunities and promote best practices in multimodal street design. Erin has worked closely with cities on the development of two of the most recent additions to NACTO's library, the Transit Street Design Guide and what I just mentioned, the Urban Street Stormwater Guide. He has also had the chance to work with cities to advance innovative street designs that create better places for people walking, bicycling, and riding transit through NACTO's Transit Program Accelerator, the Digital Design Charrette Series, and the Cities for Cycling Roadshow. There's a lot of alliteration in that, Erin. Erin has a master's degree in city planning from Boston University, where he studied the relationship between transit expansion projects and equity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Emiko, and sorry to pile on all the alliterations, but we really want to thank the National Complete Streets Coalition for hosting this webinar today, and I really want to thank two of our NACTO cities for taking the time to join and share their stories as well. And we're really excited because we are rolling out another addition to the NACTO Design Guide Library, which actually just came out at the end of last month, which is the Urban Street Stormwater Guide. We've been developing this over the past, I guess, about a year and a half with our cities, and we're really excited to deliver this resource and hope that cities can pick up the ball as they've done with each of the NACTO guides and really run with it. So just a little background on NACTO. As Emiko mentioned, NACTO is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. We are a membership association of North American cities. We're up to 48 cities, 4 international affiliates, so we have some members in Canada and Mexico, and then 6 transit agency affiliates, which is really exciting. And what's great about NACTO cities is it really runs the gamut of North American cities. It from the largest metros like New York and Los Angeles to much smaller cities like Burlington, Vermont, and San Luis Obispo. NACTO cities really represent the broad swath of geographic regions and the swath of transportation issues that cities are facing across the U.S. And we're dedicated to building a strong peer network of city transportation departments who together are leading the state of the practice in street design and figuring out how to build better places for people walking, biking, taking transit, and places for people to be, for streets to serve all the functions of city life that they need to. And traditionally, our model is focused on giving cities a permission slip to innovate. So we've previously published 4 street design guides. The Urban Bikeway Design Guide was the first in 2011. The Urban Bikeway Design Guide, and then the Urban Street Design Guide followed soon after in 2013. The Transit Street Design Guide last year, and then at the end of last year, the Global Street Design Guide, which really took the conversation to a global scale. And what this means is that NACTO is really focused on changing the conversation. So this is a street that's designed for cars, as many streets in North America are. But in urban places, especially streets that have traditionally been designed for cars and have been designed passively to accommodate vehicles, don't work for people. We see large expanses of poorly differentiated asphalt and really nominal biking and walking accommodations. And that means that very few people are going to bike or walk, and that the street is neither comfortable nor is it inviting. However, leading cities have done tremendous work reclaiming and reorganizing these kinds of streets into more complete streets, and they're substantively making these places safer and more inviting for people to walk, bike, and enjoy as public space. However, the piece that's too often left out or thought about sort of in a silo is the environmental quality and ecological quality of large impervious surfaces, which are streets. And so today we want to shift the conversation to how cities are taking the next step and thinking about ecology and resilience to climate change to get even better performance from one of their most important assets, which are streets. And cities can reallocate space from cars to people to get better mobility, but they can also repurpose impervious surface to protect and restore water resources and systems. And we know that a flooded street is not a complete street. When it rains, people biking and walking and using mobility devices are the first ones to lose access to the street and then the last to regain access. So this is a street that's not doing its job for mobility or for stormwater management. And for decades, we've addressed this challenge with infrastructure that's meant to convey the water and drain it off the street quickly, treat it off-site, and eventually dump it into a nearby water body. But what that means is that stormwater runoff collects oils and sediments and debris from city streets, and it brings them to rivers. And this causes a public health risk, it causes environmental degradation, and it's very expensive to treat and maintain. And if you extrapolate this outwards, anywhere between 60 and 90% of a city might be impervious surface. So when you have that much area, water is unable to recharge in the ground, and it's flowing off city streets and storm drains, and often directly into rivers during overflow events without any water quality treatment. At the same time, this also makes streets an opportunity. Of the impervious surface citywide, public rights of way can constitute as much as 40% of the impervious surface, which means that this is potentially publicly controlled right of way and assets that can be thought about differently. And the cost to maintain, build, and replace our gray infrastructure systems is simply too much. This is an example from New York City from Plan YC. And they found in a 2010 green infrastructure plan that the city was estimating that it would cost nearly $7 billion to meet its consent order for sewer outfalls using just gray infrastructure. However, by blending gray and green infrastructure strategies, the city stands to save nearly $1.5 billion in public funds over 20 years. And so we see that making better infrastructure investments is essential for any public entity, not just for addressing flooding and public safety, but also for making smart financial decisions. So streets are a solution that we can apply to our stormwater problems. Why aren't we acting on this on a large scale yet? And this is typically because urban streets generally fall under the purview of either a city DOT or a public works department or even a planning department in some cities. And what means that managing and coordinating what's beneath the street can already be complicated and involve, managing and coordinating what's between the buildings in the right-of-way can already be complicated. But when it comes to managing what's under the street, these are completely separate worlds. A water and sewer agency may manage the subsurface, but there are also private utilities, legacy infrastructure, and in too many cases, what's beneath the street is a complete mystery. So agencies with differing mandates can really struggle to define responsibilities and coordinate on complex and multidisciplinary projects. As we've witnessed, the conversation changed around who we design our streets for. Cities have developed a lot of understanding and a lot of sophisticated guidance around these new ideas and design principles. And we've seen that with the emergence of really great guidance and a wide adoption of complete streets policies. And at the same time, we've seen a lot of cities develop really far-reaching guidance around developing green stormwater infrastructure, trying to meet their sustainability goals and their policies and their legal requirements. But what we started to notice, and the reason that this guide came together, was that cities were really trying to bring the two worlds together. And the two cities that you're going to hear from today, actually we're starting to try to marry these ideas of how do you develop a complete street with how do you develop a sustainable street that helps you meet your goals. And so we want to move from creating a permission slip to innovate, as we have with the past guides, to creating this vocabulary to collaborate. We want to be able to bring together the worlds of water and sewer agencies with the world of the DOT or the Public Works Department. Because complete streets necessarily need to be green streets. it needs to blend all the needs to synthesize all the best practices of integrating green infrastructure into the right-of-way, but also giving planners and street designers a language for understanding what the ecological needs of designing those systems are. So integrating green infrastructure is not one size fits all. It can be adapted to your city's ecology and challenges, and it can be made to meet your transportation challenges. It can be applied at many scales. It can magnify the impact of many different kinds of projects, and actually unlock new funding sources. And it should be used to fundamentally transform streets and make safer places to walk and bike and more inviting and economically competitive streetscapes. This guide showcases a number of street typologies that illustrate how different streets can be sensitive and integrate green stormwater infrastructure. For instance, many cities have overbuilt downtown streets that they're retrofitting as safer places to bike and walk, as well as trying to improve transit speed and reliability. But while reconstruction that is focused on mobility outcomes may not involve major changes to the subsurface, green infrastructure can still be integrated to improve the performance of the street, such as these stormwater curb extensions can gather runoff at the corner, and transit stops can integrate green features, which actually has been proven to reduce the perception of wait time for passengers and improves comfort at the stop. And planters and street trees can manage runoff while providing canopy to people biking and walking and make this a more inviting human environment in addition to a high-performing place for movement. And we see this in real case studies. So for instance, this is Oak and Fell Street in San Francisco, where green infrastructure is managing 90% of the runoff on the street while integrating a protected bikeway that 98% of people feel safer riding and report that. This is gathering ridership while creating a better space for water. It also means seeking opportunities to do more. So you may have major capital projects that completely reconstruct corridors above and below the surface, such as when you introduce high-capacity transit routes. GSI can be incorporated throughout the configuration in many different places and can unlock many opportunities to create new spaces. And we see that on the Green Line in the Twin Cities, which is already passing its 2030 ridership goals, I believe. It's serving 1 million riders each month. It introduced 1,000 street trees. It's managing half the stormwater runoff on an 11-mile corridor, and it's already spurred $3 billion in commercial and residential development. So this is where you see each of those bottom lines coming together. Green infrastructure is also really important for recapturing poorly utilized street space, especially at skewed or complex intersections, such as this example where you take a previously hostile car space and turn that into a vibrant and true community asset. The crossings can be normalized and pedestrian circulation can be improved while unlocking a large footprint for bioretention and infiltration. And in areas especially with poor access to green space, recapturing streets as plazas and managing vehicle access is a boon to both the human and the water environment. And we see these innovative typologies, for instance, on Argyle Street in Chicago, which is the city of Chicago's first shared street, where impervious surface was reduced on a street on a retail corridor 31%. It's diverting 89% of the stormwater, and the businesses are already enjoying improvements to the streetscape and are satisfied with the improved pedestrian environment. So with that, I'm going to pass along to the cities. But I do want to point out that both our guide is available to purchase off of islandpress.org, and you can use this discount code 2NACTO to get 20% off, or you can access the full guide on the NACTO.org/USSG website. So with that, I want to thank you, and I want to thank National Complete Streets Coalition. And I just want to say that this work is starting to happen everywhere, and retrofitting streets is a win-win situation. So with that, I'll pass it along to Jessica Noon from the Philadelphia Water.
Hey, thanks. And before, this is Emiko again, before we get to Jessica, and that was a great presentation, Erin, I just wanted to introduce Jessica. Jessica Noon manages the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Partnerships team for the Philadelphia Water Department, leading interagency coordination for the successful implementation of hundreds of green stormwater management projects in parks, streets, schoolyards, facilities, and vacant land citywide. Jessica joined the department at the inception of Green Cities Clean Waters in 2011 and previously has worked on environmental planning and sustainability initiatives with the City of New York, New Jersey Sustainable State Institute, and the Urban Ecology Institute and the Office of Sustainability in Sarasota, Florida. And if those of you who haven't been to Philadelphia recently, they have a fabulous Green Streets program that make walking around there one of my favorite things to do. And so with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jessica.
Thank you very much, Emiko. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Philadelphia's Green Streets program. And really our Green Streets program is rooted in our stormwater management program, which is called Green City Clean Waters. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our Green City Clean Waters program overall, and then get into our Green Streets partnerships and how we work together with other agencies to develop green streets, and then talk a little bit about some of our pilot projects as well as our hundreds of projects that we have constructed or in design and underway in the program at the moment. So first of all, I think just to review, and most people are probably familiar with this, but for anyone who's not, our biggest stormwater management problem in Philadelphia is the combined sewer overflows that we have. And since our city, like most cities that were developed more than 100 years ago or before the turn of the century, we have a combined sewer system where our sewage and our rainwater are in the same sort of like sewer system. So when there's dry weather, of course, the sewage from the home comes into that combined system and goes to our wastewater treatment plant. Of course, hundreds of years ago it went directly into the river, but now we take it to the wastewater treatment plant. But in cases of very large rainstorms, we do have overflows of rainwater with some sewage diluted in there into our waterways. So this is the primary issue that our city and a lot of other cities are really targeting with stormwater management programs. And similarly to New York that Erin referenced, we also did a lot of sort of a cost estimate and engineering estimate on what it would take to build a gray infrastructure system to manage all of that stormwater and meet our compliance goals for reducing combined sewer overflow pollution. And we came up with a number in the realm of $9 billion to do that type of gray infrastructure solution using tanks and tunnels. And we also did an analysis of how we could approach that same issue using green infrastructure, and we chose the green infrastructure route, which is $2.4 billion, and that was in, I guess, 2011 dollars. So you'll have to, it'll sort of increase as currency changes over time. But that was our option, was to do actually all green infrastructure, and we're not actually doing much gray infrastructure at all except for some improvements to our wastewater treatment plant. So a little bit more just on the background of that program. We initially started our plan, technically called the Long-Term Control Plan Update in 2009, and it was approved in 2011 with a consent order agreement from the Pennsylvania DEP. The DEP sort of enacts the Clean Water Act on behalf of the EPA. So we kind of are under the jurisdiction of the DEP, but also the EPA on top of that. And our goal is to reduce our citywide combined sewer overflow pollution by 85% over a course of 25 years. We have an estimated $3 billion plus budget at this point over those 25 years, and we have regular deliverables and annual reports that we're providing to the DEP, as well as 5-year targets where we have to basically prove that we're on track to meeting those goals. We will be managing stormwater from 34% of our impervious surface citywide, and we're doing that through green infrastructure that the city is building, but also through stormwater management regulations. And we have also recalculated our stormwater fees and our bills so that individual property owners are actually paying based on the amount of impervious surface that their property contains. This is a brief overview of where we're at. And starting in 2011, we hit our 5-year target last year in 2016. So these numbers are actually about a year old, but they're still pretty significant. We're tracking a lot of different data. So this is our 5-year report that we gave to DEP. These 3 different types of projects are just to give a view of what types of programs we're working on. The 137 project packages, those are green infrastructure projects that the city, meaning the water department for the most part, is actually constructing. And that's where we'll be getting into green streets specifically, but we also have a lot of green infrastructure we're building on parks, on vacant lots, and other facility sites. The next bar are our regulated projects, and those are all of the private development projects that have come through the regulatory process. We actually had a little bit of a head start there because our regulations were initiated in 2007. So we have a large number that we reported in those first 5 years, since they actually were going from 2007 to about to 2016. And then our grant-funded projects are grants that we provide to private property owners that they can use to do their own stormwater retrofits, and then they will also receive a reduction in their stormwater fees on their bills. So in our first 5 years, we were able to manage 837 acres of impervious surface. In our 25-year program, our goal, and basically our compliance target that we've agreed upon with the DEP and the EPA, is to manage 10,000 acres of impervious surface. So as you can see, our targets are going to increase in a very high curve after the first 5 years. We're really ramping up in a big way. So I'm going to talk a little bit specifically just about those green street projects that we mentioned earlier. A large majority of our green infrastructure projects at this time are green street projects. And of course, on one hand, we have a good illustration here of just the large amount of impervious surface that is represented by our streets. But also, since we are the water department, we have jurisdiction to work within the public right-of-way. So it was really the simplest location for us to start implementing green infrastructure. We do, of course, work with our streets department and go through design review process, but we do have at least the ability to work in the street without necessarily developing an agreement or requesting permission from another city agency. And even our rain gardens and green infrastructure systems that we are developing on parks and on vacant lots and on facilities often actually are managing the stormwater from the streets, because the city streets are really our largest target of impervious surface to manage. So a little bit about our green infrastructure partnership. We have a Green Streets Committee that's been underway for about 5 years now. And that's where we are working together with the Streets Department, with the Commerce Department that does our commercial corridors, with SEPTA that has a number of transit routes throughout our city streets, with the Mayor's Office of Transportation that focuses a little bit more on pedestrian and bicycle amenities, as well as overall transportation planning, and with our Planning Commission. And we're working with all of these different agencies to not only get approvals on the green infrastructure, green streets that we initiate, but also to jump into any sort of street improvement projects or street reconstruction or transportation improvement projects that other agencies might be leading. Other focuses of those sort of committee meetings and also just the day-to-day communications and coordination that go on there are design standards, maintenance, PWD. We do maintain all of our green street projects and all of our green infrastructure that we construct. So we have a maintenance MOU with the Streets Department that details that process. We are often coming to the Streets Department with some new technologies, like green gutters or something that we're really interested in these days. Greening, doing green separated bikeways is also something that we've been looking at. And then really trying to just align with these other agencies so that when there is a capital project that's going on, that we can incorporate green infrastructure there. Or when there are federal funds that are available, we can go for grant applications together. And one of our biggest, I would say, kind of achievements as that committee is our Green Streets Design Manual. It was released in 2014. It is, I would say, it really has a template of all of our different standard green streets designs in it, and we see it as a manual that's helpful for the City of Philadelphia, working with our partners, but also for cities nationwide who may want to implement green infrastructure or green streets. So I have the website link here if you want to take a look at it. It may be helpful for other communities. But it was really a good way for us to be able to bring together our agencies and get everyone to sort of triage through design standards together and come up with things that were approved by all. We have not updated it since 2014, but we'll probably do so at some point in the near future just to keep it current for our own uses. And I have one slide that shows a little bit of the types of design standards that are contained within the manual. All of our green stormwater infrastructure systems are actually connected back into our sewer system. So we have a pretty highly engineered sort of process for each green street or green infrastructure project. So these details that we have in the manual are kind of templates that are like a starting point, and then they have to be customized to the specific location and the specific elevations and topography of that site. But it at least provides sort of a guidebook for people to start with, and it shows all the different technology that we've agreed as a city is acceptable green street approach to our city streets at this point. So to give you a brief view, our Green Streets program, as I mentioned, is the largest of all of our initiatives at this point. And these are some pretty big numbers, but these are essentially all of the projects that are either complete or in design or construction at the moment. To give some context, our project timelines are typically about 3 years long from initiation to construction complete. So these are some pretty big numbers because it spans that whole breadth of projects that might have just been initiated into survey to those that are constructed and complete and have been out in the street for maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The largest number of green street projects that we have are tree trenches, which I'll talk a little bit about more in the next slide. And they essentially look like a sidewalk and trees on the surface and then have a stormwater detention system below. In cases where we have enough space in the sidewalk, we do stormwater planters because that gives us a little bit more space to actually do infiltration and greening and evapotranspiration with plantings. In spaces where we don't have parking constrictions, we like to do bump outs, or if there's places that have been targeted by the Streets Department or by the Office of Transportation for pedestrian access improvement, we're always happy to do bump outs if the topography and the utilities allow. And then we do have a number of porous streets. There's one shown here where we actually have a stone bed and a surface beneath that street that is managing the stormwater, and then porous pavement on top. And for the most part, the only time we do porous streets is when the water department is actually doing water or sewer work in that space. So we are actually removing the entire street, and we're either maintaining or replacing or constructing a new water or sewer main. So instead of repaving it with regular asphalt, we repave it with porous asphalt, unless there is an opportunity to put some other sort of green street infrastructure into that site. Typically, if we have a water or sewer line, there's just not enough room underground because of the utility complex, so we tend to just do porous pavement. But it's very seldom that we would do a porous street unless it aligns with us actually, as a department, tearing up that street and needing to replace it. So here's a little just informative graphic of how our tree trenches work. Essentially, we are looking to manage as much stormwater from a street as we can. So we identify locations for our green street projects by looking at the topography and measuring how much drainage area drains to a specific corner. We kind of go block by block throughout the city, and typically if our drainage area is 5,000 square feet or more, we identify that as an economically prudent investment for the department to implement a green street system there. So like I said, these tree trenches often don't look like much more than a sidewalk and trees on the surface, although we have begun to install some medallions that show sort of like water department, green street infrastructure here, just to raise people's awareness a little bit. The other system that I have in the graphic here is our green bump out, and really works in much of the same way. But here we have a much larger planting system that the stormwater can infiltrate through. The soil profile actually does some filtration of pollutants out of the water, and then it is detained in a subsurface stone bed and allowed to infiltrate back into the soil. We do some soil preparation as well, and these systems are usually at least 5 or 6 feet deep into the ground. And that actually is one of our biggest constraints, because a lot of our city streets have so many utilities, especially residential streets have laterals of water and gas and other utilities going to every single row home. So that's our biggest constraint in really finding locations to implement these projects. We're looking for that 5,000 square foot drainage area sweet spot, as well as an area that does not have utility conflicts for at least the amount of sort of like the storage system that we will need to construct there. So now I'm just going to talk about a few of our partnership projects that are underway. I talked about the fact that we have all of these different tree trenches and bump outs and porous streets happening. And these partner projects are just some examples of bigger initiatives that maybe have a few rain gardens or multiple planters or multiple tree trenches in a more sort of multi-agency concerted effort. So this project, the Passyunk Avenue lane removal, is from I think 2013. It was one of our first big partnerships with the Streets Department, and they had received federal funding through PennDOT, through our local MPO, and they actually came to us because their funding provides for 20% of the project cost for drainage systems. So that worked really well. This is just an interesting intersection where they wanted to actually improve the street by removing a traffic lane, and it actually was a great sort of partnership because we were able to put this green infrastructure rain garden system in, and it reduced the amount of cost for the Streets Department if they were going to just pave over the entire area, and gave them some weight because the Water Department could then take this on as a system that we would maintain and keep in good condition for the community. The next example I have here is our transit authority, SEPTA, was building a new bus depot, and they installed this really beautiful stormwater planter system, partially to meet the stormwater regulations, which they were required to do on their property, but it also actually manages some of the street runoff from the adjacent street. So it was a partnership in which they did us a favor to a degree, and we've worked with SEPTA now on a number of other partnership projects where they were really able to like get a double benefit out of the green infrastructure system that they installed, and also have a really nice sort of like beautification benefit there as well. This next project actually, Bartram's Mile Greenway, actually just was completed a couple months ago. And it's a really beautiful mile-long greenway along the Schuylkill River on the west side of the river, which is a lot more industrial and has not been invested in with much biking and pedestrian infrastructure as, of course, the east side of the Schuylkill, which in Philadelphia has a really fantastic greenway. The greenway does actually go along the waterfront, but I did not include those images here. I just included our Green Street, which once the greenway comes off of the waterfront to go around some other properties, it comes onto the city's streets, and we were able to provide funding to the Parks and Recreation Department as well as the Schuylkill River Development Corporation to construct these green streets to manage about 2.5 acres of impervious surface from the adjacent streets, and then the Water Department takes on those systems, owns and maintains them going forward. This project, the Safe Routes to School, was another example of being able to leverage some funding that the school district had originally received as a congressional earmark, was $1 million towards improving pedestrian access to schools. And then the Streets Department brought it to us to see if we could actually add to those funds. So we were able to look into what schools could benefit from pedestrian improvements in areas that also had stormwater management opportunities. So I thought this image could be useful in just showing how we do our analyses of identifying locations for green infrastructure implementation. The blue sections are the drainage areas that we are measuring out when we are looking at these city streets. And of course, there's a lot of elevation and topography lines on the map as well. So we're looking at, usually in GIS, which direction does the rainwater flow, what is the drainage area that's flowing to each of the inlets, and then in this case, we've taken the intersection and worked with the streets department to add in some curb alignment changes for those bump outs in areas that also will allow for green infrastructure development. This is a project that's still in design. And then finally, this is the last project that I have. Another project that also is still in design. It's our biggest green street that we've embarked on yet. It's a 2-mile-long industrial corridor called American Street. And the size of this corridor is over 100 feet in right-of-way. So as you can see on the bottom, there's really a large amount of space. And right now, it's just all open pavement, and it sort of looks like a racetrack or an airstrip, something along those lines. But it was something that the Streets Department had prioritized. The Commerce Department had also prioritized because they have a lot of industrial property owners that they wanted to appeal to by improving this street. And the Streets Department was able to receive $11 million in federal transportation funds. And they came to us, and we were also, of course, very interested in managing this really large swath of impervious surface. And we had a bit of a hiccup because the center median, which it's not shown on here, but it has had rail lines on it. We were able to actually then secure another $5 million Tiger grant to remove those rail lines, which made the project really cost effective for us. So we are constructing or providing funds to construct this large bioswale that spans 2 miles and will manage over 30 greened acres. That's a project that is going to construction, I believe, next year in early to mid-2018, and it's definitely our largest partnership coordinated project yet, but we're pretty excited about it. And in conclusion, our next sort of things on the horizon that we are looking for is in our Green Streets program. We have started to work with the Mayor's Office of Transportation on how to figure out how we can do stormwater management as part of their separated bike lane initiative. And we also have a pilot program underway where we are hoping to be able to provide grant funds to developers to build green streets, because we have a lot of developments that come through. Of course, they're building new sidewalks, new trees. We have a really high rate of development at the moment, but we miss out on that opportunity to also make the tree and sidewalk installation an actual green stormwater management system, which we'd really like to do. So we have a couple pilot projects underway, and if we can get those approved, then hopefully we'll have a program to actually fund private green streets, privately developed green streets that are then turned over to the water department for ownership and maintenance. So that is all for me. I will hand it back to Emiko.
Thanks so much, Jessica. That was really interesting. It was interesting to see how Philadelphia treated the different stormwater projects depending on the type of, I'd almost say like the age of the neighborhood, thinking about the porous surface in your more historic areas versus more the industrial space. So I believe we have some questions forthcoming about that. But before we do, I wanted to introduce our last speaker of the day, Sarah Anderson. Sarah manages the Water Quality Program for the City and County of Denver. She was hired in 2013 into a position that was new to Denver and has been responsible for creating and implementing a strategic and innovative stormwater program with a focus on green infrastructure implementation. She's been successful at creating a recognizable city program in just those 4 years. And in 2013, a sustainable source of funding for the program there was no sustainable source of funding for the program, but with the creation of program metrics, Sarah successfully secured $22 million of new funding for the Water Quality Green Infrastructure Program over the next 6 years. She won Public Works Employee of the Year in 2014 and the 5281 Mayor Sustainability Award in 2016. So congratulations, Sarah. And prior to joining the City and County of Denver, Sarah was a consultant with the Audubon Environmental, a consulting firm that specializes in low-impact development and green infrastructure on large-scale private development projects. Thanks for joining us today, Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Amiko. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview of Denver's need for our document called the Ultra-Urban Green Infrastructure Guidelines, talk a little bit about the process of creating that document, and highlight 2 projects that are currently in construction using the guidelines. So in March of 2016, the City and County of Denver adopted the engineering criteria outlined in the Ultra-Urban Green Infrastructure Guidelines after nearly 2 years of work. These guidelines provide standards and details for best management practices that are suitable for dense urban environments, and particularly for use in the right-of-way. These guidelines include details for street-side stormwater planters, bump-out stormwater planters, tree pits, tree trenches, green alleys, and green gutters. Denver needed this new criteria for a number of reasons. First, Denver has about 16% impervious cover within the right-of-way. And while streets represent one of our largest sources of stormwater runoff and stormwater pollution, as we all know, they also represent one of the greatest opportunities for green infrastructure. Secondly, Denver has a pilot program underway with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And this is the agency who oversees and manages our MS4 permit. Part of the pilot includes a variance program for linear transportation projects. The variance program states that linear transportation projects must employ stormwater best management practices to the maximum extent practical on their site. But once those options are exhausted, the project can then purchase or buy the remaining water quality capture volume that the project needs from a regional facility. But part of the problem with this scenario and the maximum extent practical is that Denver didn't have any water quality best management practices suitable for these linear transportation projects to use. The criteria we had was Urban Drainage and Flood Control Districts Volume 3 and Denver's Storm Drainage Criteria Manual. And both of those documents are better at detailing BMPs that are kind of more suitable for larger development sites. So essentially, linear transportation projects were mainly buying water quality and not providing much treatment, if any, on site, which is really kind of a problem when you're trying to improve water quality. And lastly, because Denver didn't have any adopted criteria kind of for this ultra-urban denser sites, there was a great deal of individual desktop review and decisions and solutions drawn on the back of napkins. This made it pretty difficult for both our public and private projects to get through the review process. So we clearly had a need, but now what do we do? So it was time to kind of assemble the team that would work to develop this new criteria. The effort was led by Public Works, by our group, which is Policy Planning and Sustainability. We also pulled in people from the wastewater design team, from wastewater operations and maintenance, from our transportation and mobility department, and street maintenance. We also had our ERA team at the table who reviews city projects for compliance. We had representatives from the Department of Environmental Health. They are responsible for monitoring our surface water bodies. We also had development services at the table who review private development. We had staff from community planning and development who they are really responsible for large citywide planning initiatives and neighborhood planning initiatives. And of course, Denver Parks and Recreation was at the table and a major partner for us. And lastly, we had Urban Drainage and Flood Control District as a partner. And I would say that they were probably our most valuable and important partner, not only because they paid for half of the guide, but because they're really considered both locally and at a national level to be experts on stormwater management. So they kind of brought a level of expertise along with it, that without their leadership on the project, my guess is the effort might have stalled and taken even longer than the 2 years. So two of the biggest hurdles we encountered in developing the guide were centered around safety and maintenance. As far as safety, for some reason there was this idea that people would fall into these planters and never be able to get out. So we devoted a lot of time to defining things like step-out zones, which in our case for the guide, when there is no parking, the step-out zone is 1.5 feet, and with parking it's 2.5 feet. We spent a great deal of time on planter wall height and came to the compromise that the wall height would be 6 inches high on the long side of the planter that's parallel to the street, and 15 inches on the short side perpendicular to the street, which I think some of us in the field feel like that's a little aggressive, but it's certainly a starting point. We talked a lot about the depths of the planters, again, with this fear that people would fall into them. When we came up with an 18-inch minimum is what we need to get the water quality capture volume. We also have a 4-foot minimum for the access walls in between the planters, and the planters can only be 40 feet long. We also had a great deal of conversation centered around maintenance, as everyone who works in this field knows those conversations, and it was a huge concern. So we built in a number of design criteria, including the inlet sizing, pre-treatment measures with forebays and filters, and planting schemes that we really hoped would help ease maintenance responsibilities. And as far as maintenance responsibilities are concerned, Denver has kind of a unique approach in that public works is responsible for the hard infrastructure. So that's anything such as the planter walls, the flow line, the gray infrastructure, the storm pipe within the BMP, and a BID, a business improvement district or maintenance improvement district, is responsible for the soft infrastructure. And so the soft infrastructure refers to the vegetation, trash removal, and irrigation. But we didn't want to preclude neighborhoods without a business improvement district or create any sort of equity issues. So in neighborhoods without a BID or MID who can't afford one, we do have an outside maintenance contract set up for those communities so that they can also enjoy the benefits of green infrastructure. So while we don't have quite as a robust program as Philly, which is very impressive, I am proud to say we finally have a number of projects underway that are using the ultra-urban green infrastructure guidelines. And I'm going to highlight two of those. Our first one is Brighton Boulevard. And Brighton Boulevard will be Denver's first true green corridor. The first phase of it, they'll install about 40 street-side stormwater planters, which will provide about 50% of the treatment of the roadway. And that 50% was really, that's all we could get to due to some limited right-of-way. But the second phase will get 100% water quality capture volume, which is pretty exciting. So the project will also include protected bike lanes and new sidewalks and really create a safer, more walkable and bikeable community. The second project I'm going to talk about is 21st and Broadway, and this represents a really unique collaboration with Transportation and Mobility Team. This intersection at Broadway is considered a pretty dangerous crossing for all modes, all users, for bikes, peds, and autos. And so the Transportation and Mobility Team is closing a section of that street and making a more direct connection across Broadway and installing a bike light. So we worked together to also include a number of the best management practices outlined in the ultra-urban green infrastructure guidelines, and including a tree trench, a stormwater planter, a green alley component, and my favorite piece of it is we're using a green gutter to separate the bikes from the peds. So what we really hope through some project metrics that we'll track, that we can showcase how green infrastructure can be used to make safer connections. Again, while we don't have as many projects currently as a number of other cities, partially because we're not a consent decree or a combined system, the ultra-urban green infrastructure guidelines has been a really great tool for us as we ramp up our green infrastructure program. And our kind of next step is delivering another set of guidelines, one that kind of takes these engineering standards and applies them to our actual streets and gives a better visual about how you could actually use the ultra-urban green infrastructure on an arterial versus a collector or a neighborhood street. We're also going to develop criteria for other parts of the public realm, including medians, unused right-of-way that can be transformed into parklets, and landscaping amenity zones. And so that we hope that we're kind of calling it a public realm guide for now, so that we really can have a guide that gives criteria and design guidelines for all city-owned land. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Jessica and Aaron. Just as a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the lower left-hand chat box. We do only have a few minutes for questions, so I will get to about 3 today. But the good news is we also have recorded this webinar, and we always send it out with a follow-up blog post where our presenters are able to answer many of the questions that you asked that we aren't able to get to in the water. I'm going to start, maybe Aaron, if you could answer my first question that we received, but feel free to chime in, Jessica or Sarah, if you also have answers. So one of the questions that came up, particularly if you don't have a consent degree, and Sarah just mentioned this, is what are kind of auxiliary or complementary projects that can open up additional funding opportunities? Are there funds available through the EPA or US DOT that can help fund green and complete streets projects? Essentially, if I wanted to do a green and complete street project in my community and didn't have CSOs, how might I go about funding that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so thank you first to the presenters, but I will say that they're probably better suited to speak to this than I can, but the thing that we learned most often was that green infrastructure can actually open up a lot of partnerships, and that's really like where the funding opportunities lie. And the way that cities, especially that don't have a consent decree, have done it is by building robust partnerships between the water department and the DOT, and there are these other levers like Safe Routes to School was mentioned. And I think the other big lesson that we heard from cities is having a strong policy framework. And Sarah talked about this, and there are a number of other good examples, like Chicago is one that jumped to mind, that if a city doesn't have a legal requirement, setting just an aggressive policy goal that says that we want to accomplish these specific water goals can be really instrumental in kind of setting the mandate and driving people towards that.
That's great. And maybe a follow-up is a question that just came in, and I'm going to address this to you, Sarah, because you don't have CSOs in Denver, is how do you talk to elected officials or other leaders about the benefits of green infrastructure if it's not something that's commonly understood? So if you're trying to get support for something that you're not mandated to do, what have been some really good talking points?
Sure. We were successful last year. Where our funding came from was we had a rate increase, a stormwater rate increase, and we did a lot of education around that time of the stormwater rate increase of how we would use the money if we got a dedicated source of funding for water quality. Because as I mentioned, or you mentioned in my intro, we did not have one at that time. And so we have a scorecard approach to water quality that really seemed to work well. And so what we did, and try to be brief with this, but is we prioritized our basins based primarily on stormwater quality and quantity from monitoring data or from kind of land use EMCs. But we also looked at park density and vehicle miles traveled, air quality, tree canopy, and a number of other factors that we feel like green infrastructure can help move the needle on. And so we baked in all this data, and we came up with kind of 6 priority basins and 5 medium to high priority basins. And using that data, I think really got us a long way. It wasn't loosey-goosey. It wasn't like, well, we think green infrastructure is a good thing to do. It was like, here's our problem. Here's what we believe the solution is. And now we'll have a whole host of metrics that we track over time to be able to show which of those criteria we helped, improve.
That's great. So here at the Complete Streets Coalition, we really are about serving all users of all abilities, but with an emphasis on some of our most vulnerable populations. And Jessica, my question for you is, how did you integrate concerns for people living with disabilities into your Green Streets projects?
So we do, in one way in which our Green Streets program actually really benefits people with disabilities is that whenever we are developing a project, it's typically on a street corner, and then we install new ADA ramps in those areas, and the city is definitely kind of trying to upgrade its ADA ramps citywide. So that would be our main way in which we interface. Other than that, we do basically notification to civic groups and property owners, and if there's any sort of concerns there, we can incorporate that. But we also have pretty standard like sidewalk width that already takes into account ADA standards, and that comes from the Streets Department. We abide by that.
That's great. And unfortunately, I only have time for one more question. But again, we are going to have a follow-up recap where we get to many of these questions, because just looking at my Q&A box, they're overflowing with amazing questions. But a question that some of our listeners have that I also have is, how do you deal with maintenance? Who pays for maintenance? Is that built into the cost when you talk about cost? Which departments are responsible? If you could speak to that. And I'm just going to leave that open for any one of you. If one of you or all three of you want to take that as our concluding question. Sure.
For Philadelphia, we maintain all of the green infrastructure projects that we build, so that includes all green streets. Even if we're funding someone else to do a green street, we then own and maintain that in the end. And that is part of our budget for the overall LTCPU stormwater management program, is actually to fund that maintenance through the water department itself. And then we do have some maintenance contracts that we use, and some sort of job training programs that we use, such as the Power Corps and a PWD apprenticeship program that goes into maintenance.
Great. Does anyone else want to take a stab at that question?
Well, I touched on it.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would say that
briefly. Go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry. Go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, we touched on it briefly in my presentation about, and it's kind of a unique structure, but that Public Works is responsible for the hard infrastructure through our operations department, and then again, that kind of split between having an outside maintenance contract for neighborhoods without established business improvement districts, or like on Brighton's case, they have both a BID and a GID that will maintain the soft infrastructure.
Yeah, and I guess I would conclude by saying that what we heard from like a lot of cities is these are two pretty good representative examples that, like, if you're a department who's building this stuff, treating it like an asset, like anything that you put in the right of way that you need to maintain regularly is pretty important to ensuring that it performs well. One of the unique things about green infrastructure, of course, that if it's well maintained, it's going to do great work over its lifetime. It's not going to immediately. It might actually infiltrate more water over time, which is kind of a unique thing that you get higher performing infrastructure as the life continues. But the other thing is just enacting good partnerships and ensuring that there is a bought-in stakeholder in place. And cities are pretty creative about finding, divvying up responsibilities and finding sort of new partners and neighborhood and civic associations who are really invested in this kind of stuff and really want to really see it as a community asset. So it depends on the place, but it's a big issue for sure.
Thanks so much, and thank you again, Aaron, Jessica, and Sarah, for that great presentation. that was really interesting for me to learn, and I want to encourage all of you to look at NACTO's new Urban Stormwater Guide. We'll have information about how to get that from Island Press, as well as the discount and the recap blog post. Big thank you. So we're taking a break for the summer. We're all, I know many of us have vacations planned and things get quiet here. I'll be on my bike for most of August. And so we will return in September with a new schedule for the remaining calendar year, but stay tuned for great webinars on the integration of complete streets and creative placemaking, how smart cities and smart technology fit in with complete streets. We'll also have a webinar on FHWA's new Small Towns and Rural Areas Design Guidelines, and one on real estate, and working with developers. So we have a really exciting lineup coming in September, so you should stay tuned for more information about that. And again, thank you for joining us. I love, this is one of my favorite things that I do, and thank you to NACTO and the City of Denver and Philadelphia's Water Department. So everyone have a great afternoon.